me, Jonathan Dean, talk about all the time how it's freaking sus. I can't open up ChatGPT to look at what it knows about me, right? So it's like even kids just got introduced to an AI in their first 5 interactions. Even though it's really cool, make them feel they have a creative mind.
But one of the epistemologies that we use, and the reason that we use predictive processing, is so you can actually like model the selves within yourselves.
Yeah, so I wanted just to more set that lens. Like that's one of the ways in which I'm now looking at our backlog. I've implemented a prioritization framework, and now I'm also thinking about it from those pillars of like B2B software. Any thoughts on that?
All these examples I just gave are like different contexts of like where, a doctor could draw a circle around there and say like,
just got introduced to an AI in their first 5 interactions. Even though it's really cool, make them feel they have a creative mind.
We start with this kind of like question and answer, like where I can say, where you can articulate your stated beliefs.
I am diving more into the developer experience. Like, what if I were the application developer building an AI health coach for Brian Johnson? Like, what would that experience look like for me? Welcome to the ABCs for Building the Future podcast. Today, we have myself, Robert, and my co-founder, Jonathan, on Epistemic Me. We bring on entrepreneurs, builders, researchers, scientists, people in the front lines, building the future, people doing big things with big stories to tell. This episode, we're going to dive into some of our building in the open, building in public updates with some recent exciting developments with our new use case in front of us of an AI health coach. And we've synthesized some of our learnings and have validated a few different hypotheses. And we have a coherent roadmap that we're building for a partner for a hyper-personalized AI health coach. And in today's podcast, we're going to be going over that in detail, debriefing some of the user research and insights, and talking through another use case that is emerging around private healthcare practice from a doctor who is very kind of cutting edge technology that we both know that is very interested in using Epistemic Me for revamping their intake. And we'll get into that in a sec. And then we'll go over actually some of the latest code-based changes that we're making, actually literally PRs that Jonathan has in the queue. And we can take a look at that and dive into some thinking about the changes we made in accordance to our roadmap and the use cases we're building for. And we'll also get into more double-click deep dives just towards the whole theme of building in public. It'll be me and Jonathan literally syncing organically in real time about what should the future prioritization be, and just making sure that we're aligned as we're executing on this AI health coach. Quick update on the AI health coach. So I had gone to the Don't Die Summit a few weeks ago. I interviewed lots of different hypothesized ideal customer profile, ICP type prospects there, landed a soft partnership with the Don't Die team, where we're now building a hyper-personalized Brian Johnson AI as a new offering for them in their app to help their users get personalized health plans or blueprint protocol kind of plans, just get their users healthier. And one of the biggest things that I wanted to share that I learned in my customer research is that there's uncertainty in the personas involved. So I am interested in getting healthy. I am maybe a couch potato, or I'm not as healthy as Brian Johnson. There's a lot of effort to change my habits, a lot of friction to change my habits and my systems. How do I know what the payoff is? So that's a hypothesis we've had, which is people know that they should sleep more, they should eat better, and they should exercise more. But like, what's stopping them? Our hypothesis has been it's their limiting beliefs. And underlying that is uncertainty about, well, if I change habits, like, how do I know the ROI? When will I actually get the benefit? When will I look hotter, feel better, live longer, right? On the other side of it though, my product offerings and service offerings are typically from less personal to more personal. So like a recorded webinar that's pre-recorded, or ebook or something like that about meal plans, to like group coaching, to one-on-one, very personalized wellness plan based on your lifestyle. So those are all good data points that tell us hyper-personalization is the key to solve this. And Epistemic Me is positioned well, solving that from a philosophical lens and the lens of creating your model of self tied to your belief systems, and those evolve over time. So with that said, we had kind of gotten a roadmap together, and I wanted to ask Jonathan to loosely go over that at a high level. There's like 4 big things we want to build to solve the hyper personalization problem for the AI health coach, and the uncertainty problem for both the consumer of the AI health coach and the influencer who the AI health coach represents. And then I'd love to talk a little bit more about overlapping use cases with the healthcare practitioner case. Jonathan, do you want to talk a little bit about the big boulders we got to tackle on our roadmap?
Yeah, so I think I'll just jump over to the Excalibur that has the roadmap on it. Yeah, so with our Epistemic Me code base, we have an app repository where we have examples of like how to use the SDK, and our roadmap here shows like 4 different sections of the roadmap in terms of the example apps that we're building. And the first one, we have something called the Perspective Taker app, and this is one that a dean started building that is meant to like take files from a particular individual and then build a self model of them. So, like the first, he built one of you, Robert, with some of the newsletters that you wrote, and he built some of Brian Johnson with some of the documents that he built. And it's just a basic example. If I have data about my user and I want to like bootstrap or start a self model for the user, how can I use that to build a belief system? And so that's one important aspect of, and I think we'll talk about the personalized healthcare use case in a second here. But, think of a doctor, if they have like a bunch of patient information and they wanted to like map it into a self model, that they would use a tool like this. The second thing we built is this belief mirror chat, and it is a way to like just kind of chat as if you would with ChatGPT, but then you can see your beliefs mirrored back to you as you do it. And that's kind of a work in progress. We have a number of sample chat sessions that we've created in the past, and the ability for the using the SDK, as you sort of like submit an answer, it'll decompose it. It'll decompose like a question that chatbot asks and an answer that a user gives into question answer pairs that we use to extract the beliefs that are mentioned in the answer for it using you can use the SDK both to create the question answer pairs and to extract the beliefs. But I think where things are really getting exciting is this idea of a dialectic designer. And this is where if you're building an AI coach, this is a tool that you can use to like actually train a dialectic. And the idea here is to introduce this new terminology, this new idea of a learning objective, so that when you create the dialectic, the system knows that that the goal of the dialectic is to learn about the user to a certain extent. And a little mock-up here, so this is what the dialectic designer that we're building is it's going to look like. And it's really simple to conceptualize the start. It's just like, what do I want to learn about my user? So it asks you that. And then say, I want to learn about my user's sleep, diet, and exercise habits. That would be an example. Now, if we set that learning objective for the question and answer session, the dialectic, then like there's this, how do we know that it's done, right? And the purpose of Epistemic Me is so that we ask the next best question at each stance, so that we can like incrementally increase the belief systems of our understanding of the user. And then, so how do we explore the topic area of say sleep, diet, and exercise, so that we have a basic understanding of how we want to understand the user. And so the idea is that you can train dialectics to like, basically get acquainted with a user, but then you could have like dozens of these dialectics as you want to learn like deeper and more nuanced aspects and like sort of understand them better. And so what this diagram shows is some user archetypes. And so you could, if you have an app and you have a user community already, you might know of user archetypes. And these could be like people that have specific kind of philosophies or reasons that they use your product. And you can also use the Perspective Taker app to, like populate initial data so that you can have like user archetypes that have philosophies defined and initial belief system defined. And then on the other side, you can say, how do we want to ask questions to this user? And we can, we have this concept of perspective cells. And the idea there is that we can have like other sort of advisors, I guess it might be a good word, in the chat that would actually inform what questions to be asked. And so in this case of sleep, diet, exercise, we have this advisor, Brian Johnson, and we would sort of like take from perspective taker all his data, create a belief system, a self model for him. And he would be influencing the questions that are asked incrementally to understand the user. So it's kind of a simple setup, but then you run it, and it basically kind of goes through a training regimen where it will simulate the user. It'll ask a question to the user archetype. An AI representation of that user will answer on their behalf, and then it'll continue to ask questions until the entire topic space is explored, until we have a completion of our or like a completion percentage of our learning objective complete. So in this way, you're training the dialectics to sort of be ready to put out in the wild and ask real users. And that's where you can run an experiment and collect real data and then repeat the cycle, kind of like this.
Could I ask a clarifying question, Jonathan?
Yeah, of course.
So thanks for laying this out. I especially love the baseline where it's like, hey, we're helping you kind of do cohort analysis. And even before you put data out of the wild, this is how we're helping you gain trust of the AI health coach you'll put out in the wild. Is let's look at your existing user data. Let's create models of them. Let's simulate dialectic sessions for a particular learning objective. Like, I want to learn more about my users' beliefs around sleep. What do they believe around sleep? That's one. And so I think a novel thing that I just wanted to shout out is like Jonathan had this great design idea, which is in other platforms, the learning objective is not so like natural language processing based, where it's like, I want to learn more about sleep. It's much more configured, higher lift friction wise for you to determine a learning objective. So Jonathan came up with this really novel approach where it's like, oh, we have LLMs now to kind of do some sense making of a particular statement. We can convert that into a series of dialectics and allow overrides for it. So like, question is the middle part, this is still a simulation. Like, we've created simulation AI models of maybe 100 users to start. And then we've refined a trained dialectic. And then that experiment part, you're saying that's where we decide, all right, we could put this out in the wild, get real user data to back our predictions and our model.
Yeah. So for each user archetype and kind of like output, the questions and answers that were asked, and you can see whether they're achieving their job of completing the learning percentage or not. And so like what you end up with is just like, here's a set of recommended questions and expected answers from this user archetype. And I want to output this as like a question tree. So like, if you just kind of want to release your AI coach in the wild, it'll primarily stick to that like question tree and anticipate that the user's going to answer things in a certain way. If it doesn't, then you come back here, you collect real data, and then you can update it to like evolve the question tree. So it's more like a constrained approach where you don't have to worry about the AI coach like hallucinating off in some direction. And I think we're going to need to fine tune that. But I think of this like, okay, so if you run the training session on an example user and you output this kind of like question tree, I want it to look more like like evaluations that are used in the AI tools and machine learning, where you can say, given this prompt to the user, and then given the expected user responses, it will increase the efficacy of the learning objective, by some sort of like quantified amount. And so we have evaluations that say like, yes, this is a useful question to ask at this point in time. And it'd be like, yes, we're sort of like able to predict the user's answer with some amount of accuracy. And so, to have those like, to have a kind of an evaluation output set that you can use to then, know that your dialectics ready within the coaching experience is the goal here.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that. And leveling back up to the underserved needs in market that we see, this is like our Rev 1 that will evolve of how we're thinking about providing certainty to the influencer and their development team to whatever they put out in the wild for their AI health coach offering. They're sure of the results that they can get, and they're sure of the protecting their brand credibility and keeping that user trust. So cool. Thanks for walking through this. Do you have any, maybe a funny like maybe innovative kind of fun question is, because me and you think about these topics a lot. I'm curious if you thought about, 5 steps ahead, what this might look like, or like what other cool things we could do from a user experience perspective to help with those pain points?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on here. I think, in terms of, one, I'd like to have just like an interface like this that just makes it really easy to interact with. And I think that's like, that's an easy way to use Epistemic Me. And you can sort of like, you can train it and it'll feel like, it's a familiar use case with your own user data. So that's what we want to get to. Now, backing out from that, you have a lot of interesting things going on. Like, sort of if I have a learning objective defined, how do I ask the next best question, in order to like, increase the completion percentage of my learning objective? And I think that there's like a number of heuristics that are used, to do that, like breadth versus depth searches, for instance. But then we also have these tools like, the philosophy of the self model and being able to impart an epistemology. And, I think that's where, there's a lot of different ways to go about this. And so I'm exploring that, through like a training system right now, where I've pulled Epistemic Me SDK into a Python application and created a reinforcement learning tool that calculate these question answer, sort of outputs. And, so there's going to be a trade-off between like, do we delegate this to the machine learning harness, or do we delegate this to the epistemology within Epistemic Me in order to like, solve the problem of what is the next best question to ask? And our goal has always been sort of to use philosophy from this. But I'm actively kind of seeing like, what kind of separation of concerns should there be between like, the reinforcement learning training harness and like, an epistemic representation of the user.
That's a cool thought. What trade-offs come top of mind as you've been thinking through that?
Yeah. I mean, like most things with machine learning, there's a lot of like just existing best practices that you can use. And, like say, downloading what used to be the OpenAI gem, which is a reinforcement learning harness. And then, like iterating over a question answer pair with a simulated user, is a pretty easy kind of, like test harness to set up. And, then you can assign reward functions. And, so let's say that I wanted to like, so I can have an LLM on like on the app side of this in the Python code, and I can have an LLM on the back end where my epistemology is with, Epistemic Me. And in both cases, we're trying to like, kind of prompt engineer a way that we can, generate the next best question, for the user.
Okay, so not to derail too much further on the product roadmap, just want to double click into some of that to give the audience kind of a taste about how we think about these things, how we think about problem solving for the problem space of like, oh, there's uncertainty. How do we give them certainty? Okay, cool. We backed into that by looking at these tools. We showed this to the Don't Die team and they were aligned. Do you want to move to that next one, AI coach design with that workflow, like the low code workflow?
Yeah, that's, so that's the fourth kind of step of the example apps that we're building. And this would be once we have the Dialectic designer and you can train a Dialectic, then you can insert it in here into kind of like a flow of that you could design a coach, where, we had like one Dialectic trained and, then we want to like, bring the user through maybe it's going to be dozens of different sort of like Dialectic, interactions, but, this would be the way that you could use Epistemic Me to design like, portions of your coaching experience and then put them together for a holistic or use this to complement. And this diagram is just showing like, here's my user archetypes over here, and here's my prospective selves. And then here's the flow of different dialectics that we're using, to understand the user, along these points. And so, and then this comes together nicely. It's a nice, clean sort of like interaction that reminds me of some of the chatbot tools that I've used over the years, with like what you see, what you get interfaces. But the big difference is just that each one of these dialectic sessions is specifically trained to learn something about your user, and to like, sort of fulfill that learning objective.
Yeah, cool. So the idea being like, hey, I'm a developer on this influencer's team or this health longevity coach's team. I've gone through the dialectic designer, so now I'm confident about the dialectics. And then now I want to put together particular user journeys of chain dialectics for a given archetype or set of archetypes. So I could do that to curate the experience for those archetypes. Cool. Yeah, I think this rounds it out nicely. Could you go back up a level to the 4? So it's, we start with perspective taker. So how do we actually just bootstrap with existing user data, a model of self of the user, as well as their underlying beliefs. Belief mirror chat, which is a reference application in our code base or in our GitHub repo, which kind of just shows a exemplified dialectic with data, how we extract the belief systems, how we could kind of show you what's under the hood if you talk to a GPT. In this case, the GPT is our own thing. Dialectic designer, where you could design and simulate these dialectics to look at prediction and efficacy. And then AI coach designer, where you could now be confident about everything underneath the user data, have we extracted that right and their belief systems right? And then the belief systems look accurate. And then now the dialectic designer for different archetypes and dialectics for them. And then the coach holistic designer. So yeah, for the audience, we basically shop this as a high level roadmap for the Don't Die team about how we're thinking about solving their pain point. And now we're in a biweekly sprint cycle where we're just shipping against this, which feels good because it's like solid prioritized use case. With that said, Jonathan, do you want to talk a little bit about how you shared this high level roadmap with Victor, our common friend?
Yeah. So Victor's a doctor, and he's in the process of kind of building his own clinic. And he's very tech forward. In fact, has a background in software engineering, in addition to like all the knowledge about being a doctor. And I think, even anybody who's been in a doctor's office and you had to fill out like all those forms of your personal history and stuff like that. And then, you usually go talk to people and they like don't even know how you answer the forms necessarily. Sometimes there's a lot of information. I think you can see immediate benefit if you say like, okay, we have this information about user in data form, like they're sent over from their previous doctor or something like that, or the tests that we had ordered are in. And then you can answer the questions automatically, sort of like, and then whatever is left over to answer, then you can create a question and answer sort of system for them to interact with and answer in maybe their own natural language or something like that. So what you get is both like everything that we have for the data and all the questions that we want to ask of the user are now synthesized into a cumulative self model that has a belief system of the user.
If we had to state it as value propositions, in Victor's mind, what are the key value propositions for using this?
Yeah, I think I have his exact words, but in some of our chat recordings. But just understanding, I think both where, like he gave this analogy, like if he's got a patient who's a plumber, then he'll meet them in that world, right? And he'll like talk about like the sophisticated, pathophysiological interactions of the symptoms that they're experiencing in terms of like plumbing analogies, right?
Okay.
So if you can get even a deeper view of like, where is this person, how is this person trying to manage their health? Like what's important to them? What kind of terms can I use to meet them where they're at? It helps with communication during the doctor session. It helps with adherence to protocols and like meeting the user where they are, or the patient where they are in their own world. All these data points, I might have genetic records, I might have epigenetic records, I might have functional health information. How am I going to synthesize this all and like meet the patient where they're at? Creating like the holistic model that pulls all that together is something I've talked a number of times with Victor about.
One thing I wanted to zoom out on is like, so you mentioned, hey, I'm Victor. Okay. I have like, 10, 20 patients a day. I'm running from thing to thing to thing. They're filling out a bunch of data. That's the patient intake experience. I think a lot of people listening to this will feel that way, where in particular in America, I would say my experience, where we fill out these pieces of paper, doctor shows up, they barely read any of it, probably because of, incentives in the healthcare system, insurance. And so their job is in that very limited 10, 15 minute interaction is make sense of everything about you and then give you a plan that you will follow and will make you healthier. And so then the question is, how can we help to optimize that with those set of constraints? And so Epistemic, me being really well positioned to make sense of that, extract belief systems about the user, create a model. and then actually predict what is the next best thing we could recommend for this patient. That's how we're kind of thinking about it. And so I think from both sides, there's that uncertainty story that I keep thinking about, but I think that also kind of happens when you walk into the doctor's office, right? It's like you're kind of uncertain about what's going to happen. You don't know. There's some fear driving that. I think that's an opportunity to change that terrible patient intake form thing, which is like, I fill out this thing, it'll probably be tossed in the void. Like, it sucks to even fill it out. It's different at every clinic. That is an opportunity for delighting. And then on the doctor side, they're just running around from thing to thing and they don't feel satisfied. That's something that I got because they really want to make people healthier, but they're also inundated, right? With all this sense making they got to do, and then the healthcare incentives in the system they're working in. So they ultimately just want to provide the patient with a treatment plan that they know rock solid. This meets them where they're at. And they'll get healthier following it.
Yeah, I think I would describe I presented what I just did in less than 15 minutes, and he's just nodding his head and being like, "Yeah, okay."
We just dropped it.
Yeah, we've had a lot of previous conversations about it, and so I think he just wanted to see how's the software progressing. Just any things that we talked about, and I think that the specific okay, there's a tool set for data ingestion, and that populates the belief systems of self model, and there's a tool set for question and answer through Dialectic, and that will populate the same self model. And again, he develops his own software, so he's kind of like wanting to make his own software experience for his patients. His own clinic, right? Yeah,
he's squarely in the innovator category of the technology lifecycle adoption curve. Same with Brian's team. Like, not every influencer has a dev team, so they fit that profile better of where we're at as a product right now. And then on the flip side, Victor, I kind of see him as an innovator in the healthcare space, but on the healthcare side with the technical bent. So those seem to be strong profiles emerging. I was just looking through my notes for a quote from a discovery meeting we had with Victor a while back. I have the quote: "The right health outcomes come from understanding who and what a person believes in and using that insight in order to help them make positive changes in their life. That's fundamental to medicine." I think that says it all. So we just make all that better and we'll get to the right health outcomes for the user. Cool. So we walked through kind of an update of user research, landed a soft partnership. We're hot on building AI Brian, getting into biweekly sprint cycles. We're still open on discovery of other use cases, just so as we're building this, our architecture reflects something flexible enough to where we can really go to market in health and longevity, tech-focused influencers as a space, knock that out of the park. And then hopefully what we build is flexible enough to expand into other use cases, like the private healthcare practice use case. So this was great to go over and get that alignment. Maybe next what we can go into is some of the code base changes you made recently. So we presented this to prospects and now one early adopter, partner/customer. And so then it's like, all right, well, now we got to take the Excalibur and implement it in code. So, but you had kind of a monster coding session over the weekend. So I thought it would be fun. So now just for the pod, I've been really putting on my, sales, marketing, partnership, outreach hat. And then now that we have an established feedback loop, the way I think about entrepreneurship is like the founder, especially the outbound facing founder, like that's me in this group. They're solely responsible for just getting validation of the hypotheses and getting to a point where we have a fairly high confident go-to-market motion and a partner to kind of start with. And that will help prioritize the roadmap and our backlog and stuff like that. So now that that's in place, I am diving more into the developer experience. Like, what if I were the application developer building an AI health coach for Brian Johnson? Like, what would that experience look like for me? So I've been getting ramped up on our SDK, and I thought it would just be fun to synergize me learning more about the code base, getting closer to it. So Jonathan, did you want to talk a little bit about that? Or maybe we could even go through these PRs and talk through like how you thought about making those changes from roadmap to code base. So you were talking about the belief systems. Go ahead about that.
Yeah, I think in both like the AI health coach and also like a doctor-patient interaction, that if we're talking about like the aspect of personalization and really getting to know the patient, the user, we start with this kind of like question and answer, like where I can say, where you can articulate your stated beliefs. But one of the epistemologies that we use, and the reason that we use predictive processing, is so you can actually like model the selves within yourselves. And I think like the movie Inside Out is kind of a good example that even children can understand, where there's kind of like these competing forces. Inside Out has these kind of avatars of emotion that each represent like different needs that you have as a person. They're constantly debating each other with every like life decision or something that happens. Well, some of them are going to take override, and you're going to be like like overly anxious in the situation, and that's like one of these avatars kind of coming to life. So when you think about like the biomarkers that we're taking, and we take blood and urine samples, and like those are going to be like foundational aspects of both the health coach and the doctor experience we're talking about right now. You typically think of those being like, oh, this is like part of the user's profile, right? Like these are maybe characteristics that they have. And one of our goals in the project is actually to like map those biomarkers to like individual cells within yourself that kind of like modify the homeostatic functions that are happening in your body. You can start to see like the hierarchical levels of like, a self model and the cells within the cell. And I think this is one of the ways that we can uniquely model like a personalized self model for patients, is to interpret those results in terms of the ways that like they fully interact with. Like some examples of that I've thought through for the functional health examples would be, like taking metabolic profiles. I think metabolism is one. Like if we can trace metabolism from our cells through our tissues, through our organs, through our energy output that our Apple Watch measures, like we have biomarkers on all that stuff now. And so like how do we put that together in a way that's like most predictive and helps us learn the most? And so at each one of those levels, there are like questions to ask, data to collect, and like information to learn. And so like, while we're just building tools right now for this kind of like, human the question answer interface, I think what I see when I talk through these use cases is that we very quickly get to points of like, how can we make the most meaning out of this data? And it comes down to like building belief systems, that the belief systems that are sort of trained and operating within our body that are subconscious and we think about.
Yeah. Let me try to reflect that back in my own understanding and throughout our conversations about this. But I think what you said is really important for people to understand. We're starting at this layer that are very market understandable, which is, can I have an AI health coach just recommend me some habit changes that I'll get a high ROI? I could trust that, and I do it, and I sleep better. I have a better diet. I look hotter. Like, some of those maybe high level desires. And then lower level, I always love thinking about like, if we're successful 10, 20 years down the road, like what we're actually doing is we are able to create models of cells for every agent on the planet. That's really what Jonathan's talking about. And then another thing that me and Jonathan always nerd out about is like, okay, cool. Like, well, if we could do that, a human is simply a self model, which is a collection of self models, these agents at a lower level. So then there's levels in between. So then a nation is just a collective intelligence, which is just a collection of self models of those humans, which have self models all the way down to cells. So it's like self models all the way down, like instead of turtles all the way down, it's self models all the way down. And along all of those points, every one of those agents is making decisions. That's what Jonathan's saying. I'm breathing all the time, and I've been doing that since I was born. That keeps me alive. But I don't consciously think about it unless I'm meditating in a particular mindful state. So there's so many other things that are happening in the body that we just kind of take for granted. With emerging technologies and science, we're getting way better at quantifying and measuring these things. So I can nerd about this all the time, but like what Jonathan's saying that I'm excited about is like, if we land this use case and it's in health, the next thing is like, okay, cool. We've solved the, superficial, we have this personalized exchange thing. Now it's like, shit, we could like add in contextual biomarker data down to dialectics at every level of agency, right? Of those self models. So then back up to like Victor's use case, and really the health use case is, how can I make you healthier based on all of the models of cells that we've created that make up the agents that make you? Did you have more on the belief systems?
Maybe just give an example of like what that looks like concretely. Let's say, you imagine your heart and your lungs and your nervous system, your muscle tissue and your blood, like at, so we're talking about like tissue and organ sort of like level. And, like how your heart is going to respond, like while you're sleeping is one aspect that we measure. And like that, I think like resting heart rate, heart rate variability, for instance, these are all things that we can sort of measure about the heart at any given point in time. But you take it in the context of like, okay, let's now do that while I'm doing a breathing meditation, right? What is my heart doing during that time? What is my lungs doing? What kind of like metabolism is my blood supporting at this point in time? And what's my nervous system doing? You can sort of like, you can take measurements of all of those at the same time and put it in a context of like, okay, this is sort of like the context of the belief system that my heart needs at this point in time to respond to the breathing patterns that I'm enacting. Like during zone 2 exercise, your blood is pumping a lot, is helping you facilitate fat oxidation. So you know that you're burning fat and your cells are using your cells and your muscles are using that for energy. Like we have a model of interaction for our muscles. We have a model of interaction for our blood. Our lungs are pumping at a certain rate. Our heart is pumping at a certain rate. And all those things are happening while we, as a human, are experiencing like a net, what's it called, rate of perceived exertion, right? Like I'm tired. I'm tired on a scale of like 0 to 10.
Yeah.
And you could correlate like, okay, now here's the metabolic response of my muscles when I feel like an RPE of 6 or 7. Now I'm going to shift into like, say like some 4x4s, and I'm going to like really elevate my heart. I'm going to be using different metabolic profiles, pumping different sort of energy through my blood to my muscles. My heart and lungs are doing different things. And so all these examples I just gave are like different contexts of like where, a doctor could draw a circle around there and say like, we really see trachycardia in your heart once you get to like your 4x4 exercise. But over here, when you're breathing, your heart looks very normal. So let's isolate that variable. Let's understand, so like looking at the body this way and like kind of modeling it, I think it helps give like, metabolic context, environmental context, and like just a lot of meaning that we can sort of like drill deeper into. And of course, we're just drawing strawman here.
Yes.
I think once you get to the level of like genetic and epigenetic testing and modeling all the homeostatic processes that are happening in the body all at once, we can get pictures of ourselves that are just far more complex than we could even imagine. So that's where I really think the cases will naturally evolve as we, sort of meet patient data. And I wanted to sync up with that picture with you. So, something we can see the roadmap together for.
We're doing it live. Cool. Yeah, actually, as you speak about that, so reflecting my thoughts, I think I'm seeing where your head's going, which is like, that's the natural progression, right? It's like, well, if we can give a doctor or a health coach a tool that personalizes a plan, optimizes patient adherence and health outcomes, then the next question is like, well, how do we do that even better? And the answer obviously is get more context, get more data, make it better. And so that's really what we're talking about here. And as you were talking through that from a product perspective, I started visualizing like really just to add some words to it. It's like a real time, like if we accomplish this right, it's like a real time 360 health view of you, right? Like I'm imagining this like avatar UI where I'm a doctor. I look at this and then there's like the human body. It looks like me. And then it's like a physiological model, human anatomy. And then we have color coding where it's like certain spots based on the context of certain biomarkers. We can kind of have that as a heat map. And then I'm also imagining we could drag a slider to be like, all right, control these variables and then zoom back to a day before. What did the body look like then? What did the heat map look like then? And this is all to say, like, by contextualizing all this and tracking it and tying it to quantified like things, like beliefs can be subjective, but quantifying it gives you some numbers. And then we could provide that sort of experience. And then bigger picture, what we allow a doctor to do would be to isolate variables or control certain variables and then better experiment or test or make recommendations to experiment or test. Or in the future, enable a patient. How are you imagining that? And also for the pod viewers, this is the first time we're actually syncing on this feature. So we're literally brainstorming it live. So that's fun.
If I got a health coach and I can ask it like, what's my optimal day look like? And it's trained and it can give me a pretty good answer that we can zoom into like these different like metabolic contexts, like our circadian rhythm, for instance, gives us a daily metabolic context, right? Like where are we within that? And then like if I go to a certain part of the morning or afternoon, like where are my hormone levels supposed to be at? Maybe I've measured them. Maybe I have actual data about where my hormones at, and I can see the fluctuations. And like then if I'm going into a sleep session or an exercise session, that I can just like we have a unique context metabolically that we should be able to look at just from top down what's going on in our body. And, I've done enough, like, I think exercise physiology is like really interesting. Cause like by the time you're doing cardiovascular exercise, what you're really doing is stressing all the different metabolic systems in like your muscle interactions. And I think, being able to like see that and understand it. I actually think that like more analytical people would enjoy exercise more because they could sort of like go a few levels deeper. But if like, what if you can go to a session, you can say like, I stress this percentage of my cells and these muscle tissue systems today. And, I use lactic acid and I have this level of lactic acid in my blood, of which this percentage of which it might be being turned into BDNF in my, nervous system in my brain. You get to like more specificity about how you're managing your body.
Dude, it's like the whole game of don't die, right? Like everybody's playing the game. And if we just gave numbers to all these things,
Yeah.
I think in particular, the people like, my brother is a great use case. His sleep was really bad for a while. He believed that he needed to eat right before bed to feel a food coma to have deeper sleep. And so I was like, oh, why do you believe that? And he has a PhD in biophysics. And he's like, oh, it's just based on feeling. And I'm like, all right, well, he's the scientific type. So I bought him a wearable and I showed him in the data. I was like, you could just do science on yourself and see how much restorative sleep you're getting. 30 days later, he's changed his whole eating schedule. So like that says a lot. And so you're really speaking to the point of, for the maybe technical, data-driven, numbers-driven archetype, if we just gave them an experience where they saw numbers that were relevant to a particular exercise protocol or whatever, then that would incent them to play the game of getting healthier. That would just even be cool, right? Like I'm now imagining, remember the whole first Health Boost AI vision was like, oh, what if like we made this super different than Strava and you got a little avatar and it grew like a Pokemon and it's like the better version of you or whatever. I'm kind of having those thoughts. Like we create this super gamified experience backed by all this data that we can now have. I have a really strong vision in my head of like, it's like a Pokemon-esque experience where you have this really giant avatar as the main screen and lots of health things added to it. And it's super interactive. You could turn around and stuff like that and click on different parts of the anatomy. And then you can learn more contextualized by the anatomy in terms of biomarkers and stuff like that. That's what I'm picturing.
I think that's great. I mean, and in our model, you can have different self models of yourself. So if there's like a particular way of being a human is just really complex. There's so much. You have one model of self that's just like, it's kind of your beautification model of self. You want to look your best. You're looking at models of like, maybe what your body fat percentage is. Maybe you're looking at skin follicles and hair follicles.
Yeah.
And, in deep nuance, right? And so there's all these avatars that can kind of represent those things. But then, you switch over and you're like, okay, now I'm a professional sleeper, Jonathan, right? And here's the model of self. And like, there's gonna be some overlap between those two models, but really they're like two different conceptualizations of self that you need for these purposes. And I also think like we talked about, so these groups and gamification, say within the Don't Die community, like that's where the groups happen. Is like, you're actually aligning on a particular like self model that you can share with other people so that you can like share subjectivity, correlations and outcomes together, using those things.
When we talk through this and we talk really at this level of like, let's quantify fucking everything, it almost removes the human element. But just to be really clear, we believe the human element is like front and center. I just wanted to share, like, I was giving this talk at Dayforce to our engineering workforce, and I had to convince them, it's related to this, I promise. I had to convince them, basically, like, we need the source of truth of all of our work to be done on our architecture in one place. And the reason for that is like Conway's law and just maximizing information flow and efficient information flow. But the way I explained it, back to like, you were saying Victor likes knowing if this person's a plumber, so he'll talk in plumber analogies, right, about health. And so I think that's a big part of it. For the developer persona, I was like, oh, like I'll just explain to them how we're all nodes and we just read and write APIs to each other. But like our APIs are closed and they don't follow a schema or open API spec. It's like closed API, no spec is what it is. So obviously that's going to be bad. And developers understand, oh, if it's a shitty API, that's hard to work with and not going to be able to integrate a lot of systems with it. So then they grokked, oh, okay, so that's why we should have to work in one place. So when I'm too lazy to make the Jira, I'm actually messing up everybody else's API in a way, or integration in a way. So anything else on belief systems and in this particular use case riff that we're going down before we move into like code base changes?
Just what you just said, you brought the thoughts. We talked about consciousness, models of agency, and that is like, think about agency as the lens that you look at yourself and every part of yourself through. That it's its own conscious actor, and so yeah, like when you say that the human side, this is it's a type of philosophy that's really trying to quantify like what is that agency, and being put in a certain environment, how will this rational agent actor behave in this environment? And so, like that's not a model that conventional medicine uses. It's a model that like functional medicine is sort of approaching. But, there's an underlying theory here that if you could use something like predictive processing to model the consciousness and the agency of all the parts of us that are interacting, you just get you get better data, you get more productivity.
Great example of this is what I talked about with my brother. There was a version of him, PhD biophysics, that thought if I eat food right before bed or in the middle of the night, I'll get that food coma feeling. So obviously that's better for my sleep. From the lens of predictive processing, he lived within this world. His self model was there. There was no data coming in that challenged that limiting belief, right? So then I introduced some data. I was like, here's a wearable, here's a Huberman podcast. And that was contextualized to him. It's scientific based and there's numbers that you can do science on your own. And here's another PhD who talks about sleep and longevity and health. And so then the second version of James, my brother, after getting his limiting beliefs challenged was, oh shit, okay, now that I have this, my self model is updated, new self model, new belief system, throw away that limiting belief. Cool. I'm going to change my diet. Like that's a very real, when we say predictive processing, consciousness, whatever, like that very real use case of my brother thought food comaing led to better restorative sleep, gave him a wearable, gave him a human podcast, and now he's a new version of him. Predictive processing, as the theory says, he is going to make the best decision given what he knows to evolve his self-model. And so the previous, before injecting that data was, I'm just going to do what I know to be the best. Now with new data, it's like, oh, I really know this is the best. So I'm going to keep doing this. So I think that's just to ground everybody that we're talking about fancier terms, but ultimately it just comes down to those very real human use cases.
It's a great example.
That was awesome. We'll get back to feature sync in a little bit. Let's spend some time diving into chunky PRs that you have gotten together based on the roadmap we've agreed to with our partners on the Don't Die team. Now that we talked through all of this, let's get into some of the recent code base changes that we've made as a result of these confirmed features on our roadmap that we know to be high value to.
So let me start with the proto changes that I made, because the data model is like really kind of core to everything we do. And I created this PR for the learning objective in the dialectic. So this is a fairly straightforward change here in the dialectic model. We now have a learning objective that is associated with it, and basically has a description of like, what is it that you want to learn? And then there's some topics that you can specify here. Part of the learning objective is what kind of beliefs do we want to collect? And in our system, we have like 3 defined levels of beliefs, but this could be used more broadly. There's belief statements, which is just like a user stating what their belief is in natural language. There's a falsifiable belief, where we take those belief statements and we make them into something that we can collect evidence for. And then there's an evidence belief. And I guess we have a 4th level, which is a belief that's thoroughly evidenced, is a predictable belief. And so, like during a dialectic, you're wanting to ask questions so you can say, like, let's shape this into falsifiable belief, for instance. And so that would be, you can specify the belief type to do that. And then we have this completion percentage, which is like, how complete is this dialectic towards the learning objective? Yeah, a pretty simple update. And we also added these perspective cells or perspective model IDs to the dialectics. And now you can have a dialectic with the user, but we can also sort of include this advisory panel of other perspectives that can help ask questions and help understand the user. And
And that's the, hey, I want Brian Johnson's perspective. Hey, I want Andrew Huber's perspective, or hey, I want Robert Toth's perspective, like whatever other models of self we enable in the system.
yeah, exactly.
Cool.
So
I kind of think, you know, how we're in sidebar. I think about that as like, oh, cool. I could have a programmatic board of directors at some point, or I could ask them questions about
yeah,
their career and get their thoughts.
well, I think it's part of being, like a person is like we carry our values around as a reflection of like all the interactions that we have with other people, the things that we'll read in media, like,
Yeah.
and basically keeping mental models of people or groups of people in our mind all the time, just to like make sense of the world.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. That's a very common leadership tactic, which is asking yourself, what would this leader that I admire do in this situation? Right. So,
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah. It's, and I think Dunbar and Selman have some interesting theories around perspective taking specifically, but we'll get there.
Cool.
right now.
And for everybody, this PR was around just changing our models to incorporate that learning objective as a user experience. So remember that wireframe where it's like, I just want to learn more about my users' sleep habits or beliefs. This is what enables that.
Yeah, that's the implementation of this we went over earlier. So great. Also, what I'm looking at now is like the server code that's updated. And if you look at our project, we have we have the protobuf definitions, we have a server, and then we have two SDKs, the Python and TypeScript SDK that sit on top of the server. And so this is the actual update to the Go code that implements this. And it allows you to start sort of like incorporating this dialectic strategy into the dialectic or the learning. So it allows you to start incorporating learning objective into the dialectic strategy. But yeah, these are just the new.
Jonathan, how did you think about going about translating the feature requirement into code? Like that would be something interesting for our viewers, like for this particular.
Yeah. So in this case, I did initially take an approach that I evolved. The initial approach was that I knew I wanted to introduce learning objective, and I thought I would have it, but within the update dialectic API call, that you would have the tools to sort of like use that learning objective, and then within when you call update dialectic, it uses the AI helpers that are different like prompts that we have stored in our code. And so I thought like, let me kind of evolve the prompt so that it can work with this learning objective. And so it had to do new things. Like it had to, say, given a specific topic space, what is the next best question to ask, and had to come up with strategies for that. And I put all of those initially in our sort of AI helper, tool code. Here's like generate question from learning objective for learning objective, for instance. And, so you have toolkits like this, and I thought about just breaking it down so that we were using, we use a code pattern where we have this kind of like orchestration layer with a service model. So, the request hits the server endpoint, and then our service models kind of like do all the heavy work with the data models in the middle, and they call the AI helpers from within them. And so I had just kind of evolved our update dialectic service methods to do all this. But then that became, I realized that was kind of like, it was too heavy of a lift for update dialectic to be doing that. So I moved some of that code out into another training harness, which is one of the example apps that I'm building.
And that's for the give me the next best question functionality?
Right. So I think, let's see here. Here's generate answer from belief system methods. And so this app that I'm building right now, I haven't merged this yet. This is not quite where I want it to be.
Cool.
So this one actually it creates a learning harness where it uses the learning objective as like a cue to whether or not it's done learning. And then it will like ask different questions. And it also has its own sort of like, it has its own AI helper and prompts that it can use to like figure out like what the next best question should be.
Okay. Got it. Cool. Okay. So you went down a path and then you realized, oh, okay, this dialectic service is getting too chunky with this new evolution. We need of it. And so that's how you evolved into the current approach and the committed PR.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's still kind of like a work in progress to figure out like what the right balance of separation of concern is. What I ultimately want to happen is that the next best question can be determined by the epistemology that we're using. And so now I'm kind of hacking through that by using different heuristics to like figure out what the next best question is.
Oh, okay. What's the hacky method right now?
There's there's different like kind of metrics that that the prompt will use. For instance, it's going to evaluate whether a question is answered well by, say, it'll like group it into foundational beliefs, practice beliefs, cause effect beliefs, and experience based beliefs, and then like kind of give a score. Um, and this was something that like as I was working with the generative tools, it was like looking at our code base and how we defined, and it was like using machine learning best practices and then prescribing a way that we could determine whether or not we're learning or not, and what the completion percentage of the learning environment is. Um, so this is kind of cool. I'm just like,
Yeah.
so my goal right now is just to have this like the training system where in the environment where it basically like uses the Python gem. It creates a reinforcement learning loop and it steps through it incrementally. My goal right now is just to see that we can come up with any strategy at all to increase the learning percentage and like, ask better questions as time goes on and complete the learning objective. Then once I have that done, I'll have this test harness in place, and then I can go and like refactor the methodology for how we calculate the next best question and use the epistemological tools that we've kind of had placeholders for to this point.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Cool, man. Very cool. So where are we at with the dialectic harness in terms of like maturity, you would say?
Yeah. It's been really fun to build it. I got an initial version like working where I was like, okay, I like the flow of this. Now let me introduce the update dialectic SDK into it. And I'm currently configuring some of like the data specificities between those.
Okay.
And then you just keep running it every time and you make improvements and you try to like get it to ask better questions so it can increase the learning percentage better. But I also, it got me to think like, what's the most useful output of this? Like, say we train a dialectic, like, what is the most useful way to know that it's trained? And I wanted to output like a table of evaluations to say like, here's the questions that are like, or most effective for us to help to learn with this user type. And here are the answers we expect from them. And here are the like, sort of evaluation metrics. Yeah. And like, in this approach, I forget if I committed this code yet or not. There's basically like rewards, like if we come up with a strategy to ask a good question, then the system rewards it. And that's like the nature of like kind of output evaluations that you get. But let's say that you want to manually curate that, right?
Okay.
You could take the outputs and then like manually curate the rewards so that you kind of like give more reward to a certain type of question, to a certain type of user, in a certain context. And in that way, I think you just have like full control to kind of like train something and curate it, then test it again. And then just know that like, so you get like a human in the loop to help kind of tune the questions that in the way that you want your AI coach to perform.
Yeah. I like how you're bringing that, direct synthesis of research of what we learned about, hey, like uncertainty and trust are really key to the solution here. So providing that all the way through as like a philosophical approach in product and development, I think is great. Could you explain to me what episode means? I just got caught up with that. I saw episode, step to next episode, and I was like, what does that mean for us? I'm guessing this is like a dialectic session, training session or something like that.
Yeah, like I think each episode is going to be its own sort of like question and answer session, interaction with the user.
So like I am a user, I type to Brian AI, it types back, or it asks me questions, I type back. That would be one episode.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, I have to ask, is episode the right word to use here? Because I thought I think of that question answer back and forth as a dialectic. So, but I also see with our given data model why you would come up with another sort of placeholder noun for this testing use case. I'm curious how you even came up with the term, or if you think it'll change, or if this is just a placeholder or something like that. But yeah, it does confuse me when I hear episode in that context, and I know dialectic is a word.
Yeah. I think episode is like, it's not a domain language word. It's just more like, here's the test harness, and like, we're iterating over something. So it's in the sense that like, you know, you have this, you have a gym, you're training a system. Each of the episodes is just like a word that, is like the episodic nature of like each test that you're running. Um, in it. And so it's not really meant to be done at domain language. Um, I'll say like, I generated this tool, and then as I'm updating it, I have a lot of changes locally that I haven't committed to what we're looking at right now. Um, and, and, and getting it more integrated with the SDK. Yeah, there's lots of places where I want to update the language, and, like that maybe a variable that I update.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So episode in this context is really, I'm thinking of as a training session, like,
Yeah.
or at a gym, it's like I go for a training session or something like that. That's how I think about it. But okay, cool. Thanks for the clarification. Um, any other changes that are notable to go over?
I think it's the work in progress stuff. And let me just, when we look at our apps repository here, we have, so the PR will be a third app that's created here, and it'll be the Dialectic Test Harness. And then that's using the Python SDK.
Yeah.
And then I'll take what I learned there and make it into like a user interface version of the Dialectics designer, where it uses the TypeScript SDK to sort of do the same things, or it might even work alongside the Python app. I haven't really decided. But
Cool.
that's, we'll just kind of like demonstrate how to use these SDKs and how to approach these use cases.
Cool. Awesome. And there's 4 domains that are really important for implementing a customer on your B2B SaaS, and then getting them successful and happy and repeat customers buy more of your stuff. It's data conversions, integrations, reporting and analytics, and then finally change management. And so change management is honestly usually the hardest part. Just to explain for the audience, in B2B, there are multiple decision makers that you basically have to get to agree to buy your thing to leverage, depending on your software. So for our software, it's like we have an SDK that enables the application developer persona who works for the company of the health and longevity influencer. And they may or may not be the ultimate decision maker of the technology roadmap. There may be a CTO involved. And so for NoDi, that's the case. There's an application developer who we're working with day to day, who's doing the AI health coach implementation and really empathizing with them in this user journey. And there's the CTO persona who basically need that person to be happy, but they also need to know, is this flexible enough? Are there other things that I'm getting from the product roadmap where, if we choose this technology, we'd be super locked in? Could we change? There's total cost of ownership. They're thinking about that too, because they're worried about budget. They're worried about meeting a future product roadmap that the influencer might be. So for our cases, there's 3 levels of decision makers. And for a go-to-market motion in B2B, you generally start at that very, like that for us, it's the application developer for like a Workday or a Dayforce or Gusto or something like that. It'd be like the payroll specialist or the recruiter or the HRRS administrator. Back it up a little bit. Looking at our roadmap from the lens of integrations, reporting, data conversions, and change management, it's funny that the private healthcare use case and this AI health coach use case, one big commonality beyond, hey, give me personalization. One big commonality is like, hey, we have existing data. Can we just use that? And can we be bootstrapped really quickly? Can we get time to value fast, right? So that really tells me from a product perspective, like that's a hurdle. If we eliminate it, it basically eliminates data conversion as a problem. And then reporting and analytics, we've talked about that throughout, but it's how can we give numbers to show the persona, like the application developer persona, at every step of the journey, we are solving that credibility. We're solving that uncertainty problem, right? So in the Dialectic Designer, we could show you that with hey, you could control what cohorts or archetypes you apply to. Hey, you could look at their underlying beliefs. hey, you could look at making your dialectics more effective. And before you release anything in the wild, like we're giving you a lot of reporting analytics that makes you feel certain about that. And then change management. So uh, I think change management is going to be something that will be heavier once we move into the early adopter, early majority, like up the technology lifecycle adoption curve. Right now, we have landed very luckily with innovator personas where I think they're more okay with the change management stuff being like, yeah, we'll figure that shit out at some point. Day two operations, we'll figure that out at some point. But like, can we even do the thing? Um, so in my experience for the early adopter, early majority laggards, change management is way harder than for the innovators. Yeah. So I wanted just to more set that lens. Like that's one of the ways in which I'm now looking at our backlog. I've implemented a prioritization framework. And now I'm also thinking about it from those pillars of like B2B software. Any thoughts on that? Those four pillars?
Yeah, it seems like a great lens for roadmap, and like just how to prioritize the features. The integration is the part I think about the most. Just making it familiar and easy. And say you're a developer coming from the standpoint of having a database full of users. Like, how can you very quickly plug in the Epistemic SDK and just like test out some ways to understand your users better. Yeah, and I think that's one of the beauties of building the developer tool is like if you get the integration that like seamless and really elegant,
Right.
then you can kind of like hack through those other problems one at a time afterwards.
Yeah. I think the most seamless experience that we can maybe get to one day is here, drop one line in your code, whatever, and then somehow we don't have a SaaS service right now, but somehow later we do, and then we just create your models itself. Like we just auto detect everything and just create your first self models for all your users or 100 users, something like that. Well, how do we like? This is us brainstorming now, but like one question I have is, what's the quickest path to get there?
Yeah, where like a developer could integrate quickly with like a couple lines of code and then immediately
Yeah.
see some amount of value, right? If you think about a service deployed and like you can create a certain number of self models and then you have a certain amount of sort of dialectical interactions, that gives you ways that you can incorporate it in the user experience that you're using. And I think like really, can I make it really easy sort of like for the developer to get their developer key to get it set up and then to just like start associating users in their database with self models and start populating data into those and like building belief systems. A magical experience might be is if
Yeah.
like I have an existing user base and I can like I can create self models for each of the users, but then I can import like all my existing data and it'll create belief systems for them. And then I can simulate a chat with each of the user archetypes that come out of that sort of process. Um, like I could see a developer spending like a 4-hour session with our SDK. And then at the end of it being like, I see my users in a whole new way. And
Mm.
I think that would be a big win.
One of the things I think about is like Stripe, for example, is a good exemplar, very developer focused API SDK company, product company, and they just have it out there. And so I'm kind of imagining, oh, if the education part for us, like we're not Stripe, we're way lower on the maturity curve. So I'm thinking once we get to, other innovators, early adopters, early majority, I'm thinking of like maybe even on our website in the future, we have example user generated data with very easy, just visual tools to click through and show, oh, this is example analytics. If you are building an AI health coach, is what it'll look like. And here's the JSON of 10 exemplar archetype users like the couch potato or the Olympic athlete or the amateur hobbyist or whatever. So now I'm thinking the 10-star experience is like they walk to our website, epistemicme.ai. They see a little Epistemic Me Explorer, let's say, instead of API Explorer. We show belief system trees. We show some cohort analysis with archetypes, and then some other cool things that help them really understand, oh, this is like what you get out of it. And oh, actually, if I think about it, the Belief Mirror app would be very powerful in that kind of experience where, oh, cool, I see the raw data. Okay, cool, I see this. And then boom, here's ChatGPT, but I could open up the hood. Oh yeah, that is cool. Like that is thought provoking. Like I'd imagine the developer, because the developer we were talking to, they were concerned about hallucination, right? And I think actually one of the most powerful things we're doing is saying, hey, a user could actually pop open the hood and modify it. Like they could look at their beliefs, they could correct it, right? They have a mirror of that. Like we could provide that experience, or the application developer could provide that experience if they wanted, which is, can the user modify their belief statements directly, like almost SQL edit their belief statements? So basically, like that becomes like users are correcting their own data as they go, right? So that's a way better model, at least hypothetically, it's a way better model than, oh, it's closed. Users have to keep talking to the thing. We refine our learning of the thing. But it's like, oh, if we could just put the human in the loop, the user themselves, then the efficacy should go up over time and then reduce the risk of like bad recommendations. Yeah, just wild tangent, but I'm thinking that's the 10-star experience is we show value and really even solve the educational gap without us being in the loop. It's some artifacts or experience belief system explorer is what I'm calling in my head, or epistemic me explorer is what I'm calling in my head. They see that on our website and then they could be like, click get API key. And then it's that global instance of a service that we give them maybe 10 rows for, and they could play around with it. And then it's like, all right, call us to upgrade or whatever. Haven't thought through the rest, but that's what I'm kind of imagining if you want to riff off of that.
I think it's a really healthy place to go because the education component of like philosophical world models of metaphysics is hard to put in a sales cycle. And so
for fucking sure.
Yeah. And so then it's like, there's this aspect of how much personalization or subjectivity do I need? Right. And then how do I really feel what that means? And I think that's like, we just have to distill all of this philosophy down to like, when you interact with the belief mirror type experience that you can say like, oh, wow, there's something here, just like, the first time I played with Claude artifacts, for instance,
yeah,
I was like, oh, wow, like this is how I want to build. This is how I want to generate documents. And this is how I want to generate apps. Like there's just, it clicks. And I think if somebody sits down, they have the same feeling when they're just answering questions and then they can see a belief mirror and then they can really feel how valuable that is to the user. Yeah. Then like a lot of the education kind of is taken care of. Then you can graduate them to the next step of like, okay, now let's look at what it means to personalize this for all the different user types that you have and really get them thinking about how important personalization is. Like we just need to get them mature and like really hitting emotional aspects of, the UI interaction.
I think the belief mirror one is the strongest one for the general audience of anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think the developer would get it. I think the influencer would get it. I think the CTO would get it because it's a very human thing. Like when I've used, this is another thing for the audience that in the past 2 months, we've been working hard on the branding, the positioning, what the copy to describe this, like, and we tested so many different ways of explaining this. And the ones that land really well are, how can AI understand us if we don't fully understand ourselves? Or the opposite, if we don't fully understand ourselves, how can AI understand us in the future? I've not met one person where like they hear that and they're like, wait, what does that even mean? I will say, being in a bubble in the Silicon Valley, like that might add some bias there, but at least that innovator category groks that. The second thing that people grok immediately is, hey, do you use ChatGPT? And most people nowadays have had an interaction. And I'm like, you know how it's learning about you, right? And it tries to personalize recommendations. And they're like, yeah, because it is. They feel that. And then I say, well, you can't pop open the hood to really know what it knows about you. And they're like, yeah, that does suck. It's a little scary. Like I've got that.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, that's what we're building is we're building that in a way where you could pop open the hood. It's your own data. You can modify it. So that part, people, when I get there, people are like, whoa, that's so cool. Like trying to save humanity or whatever. Like, it's just, it tickles at a mission and purpose aligned, like almost ethical good force that we have going for us. Those are the two strongest examples that I've been able to just say in conversation. So, okay. So we talked a lot about, so we went through roadmap, our soft partnership, private healthcare practitioner use case. We went through code base changes based on our proposed roadmap. We even talked about really far out there things about, how do we find success in the future? We've modeled every agent in the world down to the cellular level and every piece of tissue, organism, muscle fiber on the planet. So hopefully people get a taste of like, what are we envisioning? But like, we got to land somewhere, dominate a niche. And that's really the longevity health influencers that are looking for an AI health coach as a new offering for their communities.
One thing I think you're just talking about, the ICP of somebody who's building an AI coach versus the ICP of AI alignment is just kind of interesting to think about the distinctions between those two
Yeah.
cases. The latter case, I mean, I don't think we're really ready to, present a specific case, but I think a lot about just like connecting dots about like what people are talking about in the AI universe to like AI alignment in the way that we're thinking about it. And I don't have like a sort of a clear narrative or demonstrative system, but I think meeting the coaching use case and showing how useful it is, how valuable it is, like it is kind of like the way to get there. I'll just say that much.
Which industry or market can we solve underserved needs and pain points that people would be willing to pay for? Health was the first thing that came to mind because we're both health nuts, but also because we're both health nuts, we know how emotional health is. So like tying to people's beliefs and stuff like that would be, I think, a really hyper personalization essentially by tying to people's beliefs to then make
Mhm.
recommendations. Like that seems like that was our hypothesis is like, there's got to be a lot of pain here. Let's go do more research. And then we found it. And so the way I think about it is health is a perfect use case because the next, if we solve this AI health coach thing and solve some of the early bones or foundations of the private healthcare practitioner case, then the next question is, like I said earlier, all right, cool. This is better than the existing experience of I have to one-on-one get on call with everybody in my million plus follower community. It's not happening. So this is better. Or I'm a doctor and I couldn't sort through all the intakes. This is a little better. And people are actually following my recommendations now. And I feel like I'm having a better impact on health. Then obviously, the next thing is like, all right, well, like in between the doctor and the patient, there's a lot of things about the patient that we could then contextualize, get more data for, and inform better uh, predictive processing and recommendations. So I agree with you. That's all to say, I agree with you. Where I feel very lucky we landed in the health case because I see it as a way to further that parallel longer term mission of we're solving AI alignment from a philosophical lens, which I think is needed. But we're a startup, so we got to propel it forward and pick problems to solve that will propel us to the next milestone. So this is where we kind of organize our work and stuff like that. I'm just sharing with Jonathan, like I've cleaned up this the Epistemic Me product space. So I cleaned up. This is the use case for AI Brian. This is some of the branding, positioning. Like I've been kind of just putting in metaphors and stuff like that here. And what's our narrative? I put in ICPs for different ICPs. So like open source contributors, would it be an ICP we need to know about? CTO of a health and longevity company, health and longevity influencer seeking a hyper personalized AI health coach. I had one in here for the actual contributor or developer, like the Greg. All right, I got to find it. It's somewhere in here. And then this has some market analysis. And so health was like number one, 613 billion by 2030. And then after that is a few others. So enterprise productivity, e-commerce, financial services, media, entertainment, education. From my perspective, I think enterprise productivity is also pressing because like personalization for employee experience is big. Getting people more productive in enterprise, that's always top of mind. E-commerce, like we talk about matchmaking a lot. Like, can Amazon use models of self for their users to increase conversions for cross-sell, upsell? Very like pertinent use case. Could they even edge out another 0.1% gain on conversions that would amount to millions and millions of dollars for them? Financial services, we talked about the personal finance use case in a previous podcast episode. Media, entertainment, and gaming, that's self-explanatory. Education actually is where my heart is. And I actually think this number is, I don't think this is right. I think this is supposed to actually be a much higher number. But education is also somewhere where I see hyper-personalization does really well. So for the audience, we really think if we're successful in like 10 years, like we have service area in every industry. But obviously as a startup venture, you got to prioritize. So like we're landing in health and that's what we think propels us forward. Some monetization ideas. And I'm still working this through and this is, I messaged you about this, but I'm like, would love to have whoever's leading the Linux uh, open source foundation. I would love to have them as a mentor because I'm like thinking through like how do we actually grow this into something that propels itself. But there's multiple models in the open source community of that, and I'm still working through it. And then, oh yeah, this was just some random resources about open source community building. And these are some of my notes on like high level, what is the go-to-market kind of sales motion? Make influencer know who you are, engage in their community, build a relationship with the main app developer, move to building a relationship with their CTO, continue the relationship, make their life easier with the product, which will help make the influencer's business grow. So kind of cleaned up a lot of this. And then for AI Brian, I went through the backlog yesterday and started putting together just like a high level take on the, I'm using the RICE framework, so Reach, Impact, Conference, Effort.
Mm-hmm.
And I just scored my high level take of all of these based on my feeling of Reach, Impact, Confidence, Effort. Effort part is total guess. This is where I'll need you to go through and fill this out. And then ultimately we get this like super nice prioritized backlog. So yeah, we could do this now if you'd like.
Yeah. Let me share it on terms of the ICPs and like, we kind of started the conversation with the distinction of AI alignment ICP about the health use case and subjectivity is that like, I think it would be a really probably good and interesting thing. Now, if you had everybody in the world had sort of like a self-identified health religion or religions that were like suited them the best, and you only interacted with AI that was going to be like helpful in that way. You were aligned with the AI in your health religion. If you think about somebody with a defined health religion, then going and getting a job at an enterprise and then needing to be personalized, in the enterprise use case, if they already have their health religion defined, like it helps us to make sure that the AI is going to be value aligned with them on that level before then we think about like, now what is your ideal sort of purpose aligned work? The AI would only recommend things that interactions at work that were like along the lines of your health religion, and they wouldn't recommend anything unhealthy to you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically you're saying I am Robert and I live in this world that epistemic me is pervasive across every application and software, business and in society, software and business and society. I use an AI health coach, AI Brian, and it is aligned with keeping me alive because that's its job, not just that optimizing for not dying. So then when I bring that self model to the enterprise space to do my job, then whatever system that hooks into, are you saying is already aligned on, like I'm trying to keep you alive. I'm going to keep trying to keep you alive and give you recommendations that layer on top of that foundational philosophy in which I should engage with you. And then the other thing I would add is like, I like how Brian's going about it, which is not dying is like, we need to align on just that one game. We're all playing this game. We're not dying. So we agree with that. AI might make us die. So if we're agreed on this, we should figure that out. That's the simplistic kind of bro science level of me explaining, how Brian is trying to inculcate this full stack philosophy to get us to solve AI alignment. But I think you provide a different perspective, which is like in this world where every AI health coaches are ubiquitous. I wanted to share, I actually have this video I recorded. I've interviewed my cousins because I'm just always on, right? So I was playing with my baby cousins and user interview research questions to them. And so after I showed them a bunch of AI tools, I'll actually share this video with you. It was amazing user research in my mind where, well, first of all, I'm not talking to kids all the time. Like my baby cousins are kind of like the only kids I get to talk to. And I showed them ChatGPT. And I was like, hey, this is an AI. And Jolie, she's 8. She's like, what's an AI? And I was like, it's artificial intelligence. She's like, what does it do? And I was like, I don't know, just ask it to do something. She said, can you draw me the sky? And I was like, okay, I'll do you one better. Draw the sky as a watercolor painting. And then it, went into the image processing thing. She was kind of intrigued and then it popped up and it was like, sky as watercolors. And she's like, what? It blew her mind because it was the first time she's ever seen that. And she's 8 years old, right? They have a different perspective on life. They're just way more curious and open. So then she brought her little brother, Max, 6 years old. They both looked at it and were like, what? And so now he's like, can you create me a pizza man? And I was like, okay, what do you want the pizza man to do? They read Captain Underpants. So like very cartoony, kind of satirical, Sunday morning cartoons sort of art style. And so I was like, okay, you wanted that in art style. And he's like, I want it underwater. And I was like, okay, so something like Atlantis. So I just prompted ChatGPT. I was like, okay, now make me a pizza man fighting enemies underwater at Atlantis in Captain Underpants style. Then the whole like, oh, his processing came up again and they were like on the edge of their seats. They're like, what is going to happen? This just blew my mind once. What's going to happen? And it, boom, pizza man underwater in the art style. They're like, what? Like minds blown. And then they were excited. They were like, oh my God, now could we make there be turtles around? Could we make the pizza man fighting a toilet that has a turd for a head? And I just made all these things. And then, once we got done with like that, just making images, I was like, well, why don't we make videos? And so I went to Sora and just showed them, I was like, what video do you want to make? And I made something similar. And they were, wow. So then I did the day after, I let them kind of absorb that, but they kept coming back to me throughout the next 24, 36 hours. And they kept asking like, could you make me something else? Could we make this now? Could we do this with the pizza man? And then I had an interview with them 24 hours later. And I was like, what do you think of AI? And this is really interesting. So they were really excited. I would say 95% was just excitement. And I asked why. And I'm like, because you have to wait 30 seconds to 60 seconds to get an image or get a video from this. And it's not the best thing. The videos are like 10 seconds long or whatever. So like, why is this cool to you? Because they watch other movies, TV shows, cartoons, they play games. I'm like, why do you like this? Why do you keep coming back to this? And they're like, it's because it makes me feel like I have a creative mind. And I was like, wow, holy shit. Like that is really the underlying, like, what is the inner child? Because they're children. So what is the child thinking when they're using these tools? Not the adults using these tools nowadays. I think some of them might be actually feeling that way. Maybe people who are interested in graphic design or art, but maybe don't have invested in the skills. And so now they can do stuff with it. But I actually think if you took Jolie and Max, my baby cousins, and we just put a time slider 20 years down the road, these kids are going to grow up and then grow into consumer purchasing power with an expectation that every software system they ever interact with can provide that. It knows what's in their mind and can translate that to reality or some deliverable or some output. That was some of my learnings, just talking to my baby cousins. And then the other thing, so that was 90% like super excited. I get to take what's in my head and make it reality. It makes me feel like I have a creative mind. Have that data point. Second data point I got, my little cousin Max said that he felt that it was sus. And I was like, whoa. Well, first of all, he knew that word or that slang to say it's suspicious. He called it sus specifically. His parents are pretty hip and cool. So I think he gets it from them. But he compared it to a TV show character. And I forget what TV show off the top of my head, but it was like some character that was like famous in the TV show for backstabbing everybody else that was like a hero or good. And so he said that he got that same kind of feeling in talking to the AI for the first time. He's like, how can it do this? That's a little sus. And I was like, oh, interesting. Because me, Jonathan Dean, talk about all the time how it's freaking sus. I can't open up ChatGPT to look at what it knows about me, right? So it's like, even kids just got introduced to an AI in their first 5 interactions. Even though it's really cool, make them feel they have a creative mind.
You remember when you started chatting with them and I sent you that picture of like robot pregnant women?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's just crazy how faster things are evolving. Like, so we used to grow up the same way our grandparents did, same rituals, same beliefs as like, our grandparents for as long as humans existed until about 200 years ago. And then like now we have media and like each generation kind of lives a different life from incubation. And like, and now like you think about a kid who's not even like, you think about say an embryo's nervous system interacting with a digital world of LLMs before they're even like fully conscious in the womb. Right. And like there may be parents who are like, I need to raise my kid this way. So that they come out and they have like, a hyper advanced education by the time, they're in preschool or something. And I don't know what it means to like, it just seems like we're increasingly bringing these tools into ourselves as like, it's second nature. Your cousins are growing up one way and guess what? Probably kids more 10 years after them are going to grow up even more integrated to technology. So
100%. Yeah. I think you're right. Like, we don't know what we don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty in the future. And for the audience, Jonathan when I described him about this interaction with my baby cousins in Slack, he sent me this like, I don't think tweet or on X of, I don't think it was real, right? I think it was AI generated of like AI embryos, like an AI robot, feminist
Yeah, I was
robot
AI generated. Yeah.
that had like a belly that was translucent that you could see a baby embryo being formed. And I was like, oh, this totally makes sense that we would solve for pregnancy this way in the future, especially with everything that's going on around like gene therapy and stuff like that. Like that I'm like, I know this is like futurism right now, but I'm like, oh yeah, like listening to Life Force, listening to all these other longevity things at the intersection of AI and tech. I'm like, yeah, that shit's happening at some point. I just don't know when.
Yeah.
It's a
Well,
crazy world, man. Crazy world.
postmodernist philosophers saw this coming in the sense of like that the, the fractured narrative of like a shared reality that religion brought, combined with the evolution of technology, is going to give everybody these hyper personalized media environments that effectively, if you take that, if you extrapolate that, that we all just end up living in our own worlds and never need to even like interact with one another. And that was the basis of the Matrix. Like the philosopher Boulidard is who wrote the book that the Matrix is based on. That was like the early 1980s take on like where technology is going, given like flooding of media and hyper personalization, all driven by AI.
So interesting. People who are basically visionaries, they write stuff like Dune or Ready Player One or Snow Crash or whatever. And then it's like the engineers, it is a funny way to think about it. The engineers read the sci-fi books and then they grow up and they go fucking implement it.
Yeah.
Only recently I realized it was written in the 70s. It was just called 1984 or whatever. I had this bias in my head or something like that, that I thought it was made in 19. And I was like, wait, I thought it was so accurate when I read it. And then I realized it was written 15, 20 years before or whatever. And it's even, I mean, like, it really speaks to the world we're in today, right? Like, yeah, a lot of parallels to society we could definitely read about in sci-fi books of the past. It's fascinating. So the AI alignment ICP, tell me more about that.
Yeah, I guess there's just this question in my mind of like, do we really need to worry about other ICPs other than health? Because if we just like embrace a version of AI alignment that is health and then build everything else on top of that, then it just is the most sort of foundational thing. When you talk about AI alignment and you talk about like AI that understands us, like if we had people that could evolve, identify different health religions where the AI was aligned with the way that they want to live their life, then, for example, them going in, finding a job at an enterprise company and being productive in that company is just going to be within the context of their health religion. So it's like there's sort of like is there even a need to talk about other ICPs until we kind of like can match the AI coaching use case ICP to an AI alignment ICP.
If you're asking me, yo, should we focus? I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah. We should always focus. But if you're asking me, like, Robert, should we lift up our heads or should we just keep going here and it'll take us there? Which I think is what you're asking. I think you're right. The only caveat I'll throw in, it's more of
It's part of what I'm asking. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more of a trade-off, I think, which is, so zooming out a little bit, I had it upon me for this quarter to try to get an advisory council together to like help balance our technical implementation with people. Like, it'd be great if we had like Michael Levin or Fristen on our advisory council, right? And then we could show them code, we could show them what we're trying to do with AI health coach, and they could actually rigorously help us make it better. I think that's still good, but we should probably narrow it now is what I'm thinking. Like, it should probably be people that are also like us, that are very interested in the health use case and seeing that through, that think about health and longevity a lot. The only one that I see, and if the audience sees other ones, let me know, that is actually trying to sort of full stack tackle the AI alignment problem from a philosophy lens, not from like I'm in a lab, like kind of thinking about it from an ML engineering lens and kind of, theorizing about it. But he's like tackling it from like a human consciousness. We all need to align philosophically. And then also at the same time, we got to solve this with technology. So my thinking is if we laser focus on solving this stuff for him, the data points we have from him are that he wants to solve AI alignment from the lens of philosophy. So we just keep doing this. I think we will get there because he wants to get there. That's my perspective anyway.
So I think Brian's on the leading edge of like that AI alignment is a health religion.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, totally.
like, and I think probably not too far behind him is Peter Diamandis with Found Life and Tony Robbins. You know, they're very much moving that direction, full stack.
I got to look more into that. What are the latest updates you're getting from them? Like, do they talk about philosophy and stuff?
Well, you read Life Force?
I'm still in it, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're not talking philosophy specifically, but I think that like the aspect of evolving the patient provider relationship, they have 4 different clinics. And so they're just going at it from the direction of like, let's have our own clinics. Let's build data models of all of the patients. Let's use AI to like evolve these data models and help like, and they have more than just like, they have functional health coaches. They have conventional medicine doctors. They have a whole team around every single one of their patients. And their patients initially were paying like $50,000 a year to be part of the clinics. And now they have like a lower tier offering.
Brian, I think, has been very like spectacle based. And then he got into
antics.
Yeah. And then he got into food and supplements, which is like you're starting off mass market. They started off, upper market, like let's sell it to the rich and then move down market.
They're selling to the person who has money and they want to turn that money into years to live. So these are older people that are wealthy and will pay anything to just get a few more good years, right? I see Brian's movement is appealing to a much younger demographic.
One of the things I'm thinking about is like, if we reverse engineer their go-to-market motions, what does it mean, their go-to-market motions for AI alignment? Also for the audience, we are totally armchair speculating right now. All of this should be taken with a grain of salt. Here's my thinking, even with that grain of salt. Why I like Brian's approach is that he is creating an app where you could voluntarily put in data and he will be able to accrue a bigger data set faster with the gamification and loops that he's putting into his app, which is like every day we get your markers and then we create events where you could measure yourself and then put in the app and then you progress and you share that. You interact in the app. You have a social side where you interact. And so that's another piece of data that contextualizes some of the biomarkers and progression and health. Whereas, so he has hey, I have one data model. I don't got to worry about anybody else's systems. I have it in my system. That's actually from a product entrepreneurial lens. I like his advantage there. Peter and Tony, they started these longevity clinics. I got to look into it more. I don't know if they have a common app between them, but I can't imagine with the complexity of teams that are applying to this, if it is like that, where one patient, 50K, 1 year, you have 8 people around you with different expertise around your health. What's the software system those people are using? I highly doubt it's like one data model, one software application they've created for every single longevity clinic across all of those practitioners. So I would guess, based on what I know, and this is also a grain of salt, they probably have a data fragmentation problem that they will have to bring together at some point. Whereas Brian doesn't have that problem. There would just be different problems to solve there. And then eventually, you talk about the religions thing, that religion or models of religions tied to models of self are going to be stronger for whoever has the most data. That's, maybe this is like my armchair thinking about it, but those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah. The Found Life clinics, by the way, they aggregate all their data into their, I think it's called Zora AI coach. So they are, they're definitely like bringing it all together and synthesizing it in one spot. I've just been thinking about the power of, the personalized health religions. If you had to select a health religion in order to find the AI that aligned with you, then like you're going to default opt into something, and then you can like, sort of opt into something that's like more specific or more tailored to you after that. And that might be where your Brian Johnsons and your Peter Diamandis have offerings. But I really see like Peter Attia is going to have a health religion, and Rhonda Patrick's going to have a health religion. And all these people that are influencers, they're really just disciples of their own health religion that is appealing to people in the way that they want to live their life. And so, like if that's really, that's really all alignment needs to be about in order for safety to be provided. That seems infinitely doable. It seems like a lot more concrete and specific than the AI safety methods that I hear about coming through OpenAI and Anthropic and this kind of thing. At least when it comes to like individual interactions. So
100% agree with that. I definitely, I mean, I'm biased as shit, but like, I think our approach is better. I think we're taking a differentiated, and maybe it's just going to come down to this. Like I had an assumption that they just had fragmented data, but maybe they don't.
Yeah, I don't have firsthand like information, but I think the overarching thing I'm just like wanting to flesh out, I think, is this idea that it's just health religions are imminent. They are upon us. It is the same as AI alignment. Do we need to worry about any other ICPs other than just like, AI health coaches? Um, those are some of the formative thoughts in my thought landscape right now.
I think from an entrepreneurial lens, no. And then from like a purpose lens, no. I think we just hyper focus on this. And then we'll get there, which is nice. Like, which kind of tells me we picked the correct space to solve, or the right problem space to solve with the right use case. So that feels good, man. Cause like, I would love to just focus, just like put all my time and energy on like one thing and get to know
Yeah.
it really, really, really well. So, I'd love to ask Dean about that next time we chat with him, get his perspective on it. But logically, it makes sense to me. Like if we assume that our hypothesis is correct, which is health religions are going to be they're upon us, it's going to be a thing, then I think extrapolating that, yeah, I think we just keep focusing on the AI health coach thing and it plays out the way we envision. Then I think naturally we will be on the forefront of solving this. At the very least, like if we get integrated with every health and longevity influencer or big company like Fountain Life that wants to contextualize their user data set with belief systems, et cetera, then like our tool is literally helping with the AI alignment problem at the lowest level of individuals and macro scale too. That's how I see it. Yeah, we just got to execute, dominate that market of longevity health influencers that are interested in AI health coach, and then do that, get enough reps there, and expand to probably private practice use case and other health use cases, and just dominate the entire health and longevity market. Get 100%, get 100% there, and then we can move to enterprise productivity,
Right.
like education and stuff. So this is the way I'm thinking about it from a progression of markets is we had to land on a particular battle zone. Like in Crossing the Chasm, they talk about this concept of D-Day. You got to pick the frontier you're on. So our frontier is health coaches and longevity coaches or influencers. And in particular of that, people that have an AI technology bent. And then of that, people that would love to leverage an AI health coach. I think we kill that, dominate that market, expand, and then we just get to, okay, now it's click button, drop some content or send me your YouTube link and we've created your AI health coach, click button, deploy, you have it on an app. Then we capture the laggards of that category. Then we expand past that to anybody in health, longevity. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. It's awesome, man.
That makes sense, right? Like in my head, it makes a lot of sense.
It does. I mean, I can see a similar path, and I just, yeah, just the whole idea of health religions and AI alignment. It seems like sort of obvious on one end of the scale, and then like sort of like I can't talk about this with anybody on the other end of the scale. I think really wanted to flesh out for myself like that. That's the right. That's the most thoughtful way to think about it.
Yeah, I think we should talk about that. Like another, I think Don't Die is probably the only group on earth that I feel like where we could probably talk about this and get some traction of an idea because people there are thinking about it. I think a good test would be in 2 weeks, we're doing that Don't Die event and we should totally bring this up. And then also like just tell people, hey, we're reading Super Agency if people want to join the book club. And then we could use that as a feeding ground for testing our ideas. It'd be a, slightly biased group because everybody there is already in Don't Die. Give us a little less bias than just talking to each other. So,
Yeah.
so because we're basically like, yo, bro, am I right? And I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah, dude. Yeah, of course we're right. So it'd be good to have some of our assumptions questioned, or even just like different questions to ask of us that we could strengthen our position in thinking.
Right.
Yeah. I've been going through the mastery book. Oh my gosh, dude. I'm maybe 75% of the way done. It is one of the best books I've read. Like it's so good.
Really?
It's so good. And I think it also appeals to me a lot because I love stories and it's full of stories tied to takeaways. And I think you're going to really like it. I learned so much more about like Einstein and Leonardo da Vinci and Mozart, like all these like historical figures that have made a giant impact on humanity. And I'm just like, wow, like they all started off from humble beginnings. Like,
Yeah.
and they all had very human struggles and they went and just left a mark on humanity that was outsized. And I'm like, dude, like we can do it. Like, all right, everybody. Thanks for coming to listen to the ABCs for Building the Future podcast. Today, we kind of talked through our technical implementation of our feature roadmap that we really prioritized based on this soft partnership with the Don't Die team. And we also have scrutinized our feature roadmap based on some other use cases we're looking at in the private healthcare practitioner use case. So hopefully you found this helpful to actually walk through some of the code changes that we've made around our Dialectics service, the test harness that Jonathan had put together for the Dialectic designer use case to increase efficacy of a dialectic so that an app developer persona could release a really high quality AI coach that they're confident in. So appreciate you tuning in and hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.